Good morning. Thank you, Emerson, as well as everyone who's watching on Facebook Live. My name is Rochelle Sparko. I'm the Director of North Carolina Policy at the Center for Responsible Lending. We're here today to acknowledge and celebrate the introduction of House Bill 707, the Student Borrowers Bill of Rights. We will hear from borrowers who will benefit from the protections the bill creates. But first, we will hear from Representative Rachel Hunt, who is a primary sponsor of the bill, along with Representative Mitchell Setzer and Representative Don Hardister, about why the Student Borrowers Bill of Rights is needed in North Carolina. Representative Hunt represents House District 103 in Mecklenburg County. Representative Hunt, thank you for joining us today and for your strong support for providing North Carolina student loan borrowers with protection from abusive loan servicing that can make it harder for people to pay back their debt.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. Good morning. Thank you for being here. I'm sure you have all heard a lot about the national student debt crisis. 44 million Americans carrying $1.7 trillion in student debt, which is holding people back from buying homes, covering other major life expenses, and making higher betray its promise of a path for families with few resources to reach the American dream. North Carolinians are certainly impacted by that crisis as well. Million student borrowers, who owe a collective $48 billion. This has tripled between 2008 and 2018, and we have the second highest increase in student debt in the country. A third of North Carolina borrowers in repayment are unable to keep up. They are in, which causes a cascade of harmful consequences. Lower credit, having their earnings or even their Social Security benefits garnished by the federal government. As a college student debt can be. This level of student debt not only holds them back, it holds back all of North Carolina. While most people think of student debt as a federal issue, there are strong actions states can take to help this crisis. Part of the problem is student loan servicers are failing to work in the best interest of borrowers and are instead hindering rather than helping them manage their debt. The Department of Education, which makes up over 85% of student loans, hires out-of-state loan servicers to collect payments from borrowers and respond to their questions. Borrowers are entitled to be placed in an income-based repayment plan if they are unable to make their payments. But servicers often withhold that information and put borrowers in deferment plans, which often costs borrowers more in the long run and brings the servicer more revenue. They are also frequently allocating payments improperly, increasing the total debt and interest. Some borrowers end up with a higher balance than what they borrowed, even after months of payment. I am proud to introduce, along with co-sponsors Rep. Setzer and Rep. Hardister, the Student Borrowers Bill of Rights. This bill will hold servicers accountable and vastly improve their practices. Solid and responsible servicing will help students manage their debt more effectively, reduce financial distress, and free more of their resources for financial activities that will boost all of North Carolina's economy. Specifically, House Bill 707 will require servicers to apply partial payments to a borrower's account to minimize late fees and negative credit reporting, and to ask the borrower how they want the overpayments applied. It will require servicers to evaluate borrowers for income-based repayment options before placing them into forbearance or default. It will prohibit servicers from misleading borrowers failing to communicate in a timely manner, or giving inaccurate information to credit union agencies. Student loan servicers will be accountable to the Office of the Commissioner of Banks, which will also accept complaints from borrowers and facilitate communications. It is unfortunate that this kind of oversight is necessary, but the data and the stories, some of which you will hear today, show that it is. Over a dozen states have already passed student loan servicing laws to address these problems for their citizens. Many more are working on such laws, and North Carolina should live up to our reputation of excellence in higher education matters and pass the Student Loan Bill of Rights this session. We call on our colleagues to sign on and support this legislation for quick passage so we can begin to offer the many North Carolinians experiencing the heavy load of unmanageable student debt immediately. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Hunt, for your speech and for your support for this legislation. We will now be joined by Trey Roberts. Trey is the Community Engagement Manager at Dix Park Conservancy. He's also a co-founder of Raleigh Pride and serves as a member of the Raleigh Municipal Government's Human Relations Commission. Trey received a BA in Mass Communications and Media Studies from William Peace University here in Raleigh, graduating in 2018. He received his Associates of Arts degree from Nash Community College in 2016. He is a proud member of the Haleiwa Saponi tribe. He has spoken about the need for student debt reform on The State of Things and in the Washington Post. Trey, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, I'm Trey Roberts. I'm from Hollister, North Carolina in Halifax County, and I live and work here in Raleigh. I have about $38,000 in student loan debt, which is barely budged from when I graduated from William Peace in 2018. My mother went to community college and my father didn't go to college, which is typical for my hometown. Most folks go to work in town or in a factory. I wanted to go, but didn't for 2 years after graduating high school because I was a bit intimidated by the whole process. I wasn't sure if I really belonged, and we didn't have a savings to rely on. I didn't know quite how to go about getting financial aid. It's tough figuring out the FAFSA website and navigating the maze of loans, what subsidized and unsubsidized means, and so forth. And with little help and some Googling, I eventually got that figured out, and I started at Nash Community College, then transferred to William Peace, relying on federal and private loans to help me through. Once I graduated, I started paying off my private loans while serving at a restaurant, and 6 months later started getting notices from Nelnet telling it's time to start paying them. I hadn't yet started my career and was living with 3 roommates. It was overwhelming and the payments were completely out of reach for my income level. I finally called Nelnet and told them I couldn't manage the payments, and they gave me a deferment. But it wasn't until my roommate told me about income-based repayment that I looked into it. I had to call Nelnet and asked in order to get in the program. Even then, they wouldn't take into account the private student loan payments I was making, so the payments were still tough. For 2 years, I had to choose between rent, my student debt payments, health insurance, and other lifestyle expenses, and I ended up going without health care for that time. I worked freelance jobs to fill in gaps, but I'm far from being able to do the things that require me to invest in my future, like buy a house. Not only is this an economic issue, but it is a racial equity issue. Almost half of Black graduates owe more than undergraduate student loans 4 years after graduation than they did when they received their degree, compared to 17% of white graduates. In North Carolina, the average annual household income of families of color is $25,000 less than white families. People of color also face a racial wealth gap, where nationally white households have 10 times the wealth of Black and brown households. I support the Student Borrowers Bill of Rights because I went so long without real support from my servicer, and without knowing I should have and could have been in an income repayment program that would have been better for my situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Trey, for being such a vocal advocate for student loan borrowers across North Carolina. Our next student loan borrower couldn't be with us today. Kanethia Rankin is a student loan borrower from New Hanover County. She wasn't able to join us today because her work schedule wouldn't accommodate travel to and from Raleigh for this event, but she provided a statement to be read on her behalf. Representative Deb Butler, who represents part of New Hanover County, will join us now to read Kanethia Rankin's statement.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Representative Hunt for inviting me to be here and join in this rather hot press conference. I'm happy to read the statement for my fellow New Hanover citizen. Her name, Kanethia Rankin. Kanethia says she was orphaned as a young girl, so she's been in charge of her finances for a very long time. Her sister stepped in to finish raising her and her brother and a very wonderful mom. So she thought that going to college was the best way to build a good future. Unfortunately, furthering her education ended up being a roadblock for her. She has student loan debt and she wants to pay it, but her loan servicer has made it impossible at every turn to figure out how to get the debt back in good standing. As a young woman, she enrolled at South Carolina State University on a partial athletics scholarship. After an injury, she lost that scholarship, but she got a job and then ultimately was unable to afford to stay in school. After leaving South Carolina State University, she enrolled at Anderson University, thinking that completing her education would help her to get ahead. It didn't take long before she realized she couldn't afford the tuition and was unable to complete her BA. Now, 15 years later, after leaving Anderson University without a degree, she owes $70,000. This is more than she owed when she stopped attending school. After leaving school, eventually her student loan payments became overwhelming. She thought she did the right thing when she contacted the financial aid office to ask for help. They helped her work with her loan servicer to get a hardship deferment a couple of times. During the deferment, of course, interest continued to accrue, and that is why she owes more now than when she stopped attending school. The payments on her student loan debt after deferment were unaffordable when she was a young adult. Now that she's better off and she wants to move forward, that debt is making it impossible for her to realize her dreams and to accomplish her goals. I want to complete my degree. I would be the first in my family to do so. I want to buy a house, but I can't qualify. My student loan servicer won't give me clear, accurate information, and so I am stuck. I work for a company that would even pay for me to attend college, but because my student loans are in bad standing, I am not allowed to enroll. I am working with a credit counselor to try to get back in good standing, but even with an expert, I can't get trustworthy information. I owe this debt, I want to pay it, I'm trying to better myself. Good for you, Tanisha. But the truth is not being told about student loans, and I think they should be accountable to me so that I can get back on my financial feet. Good luck to you, Tanisha. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Representative Butler, for reading her statement. And thank you to Kanethia for sharing your story today. I hope that you're joining us on Facebook Live. I now invite Carol Parrish, Communications Manager at the Center for Responsible Lending, to share a story from a borrower who has asked to remain anonymous.
Good morning. Thank you for being with us. If you are a reporter who would like to talk with this borrower without revealing identifying information in an article, please let me know and I will put you in touch with the person. This is the statement. I am a North Carolina resident who works in healthcare. I wish to remain anonymous at this time because my application for public service loan forgiveness is currently under review. Because of the extraordinary issues, demands, and uncertainty in the process of seeking PSLF, I have no confidence in the servicer, and out of an abundance of caution, do not want to speak publicly until the response to my application is signed, sealed, and delivered. I filed my application, what I call my Holy Grail form, in January, so the decisions should be made on my case by May. At one time I was a teacher. I had to make ends meet by waiting tables, and teaching was never going to pay off my student debt. So I eventually cut bait and went back to school to prepare for a career that would provide a more livable income. As I was finishing my degree, I heard about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, so I sought a job that would qualify me for making income-based repayments for 10 years and then having my loan forgiven. Here I am, 10 years later, and having been through the process, the reports of how few borrowers actually receive the loan forgiveness they have sought are not surprising to me. To begin with, just applying for the program was onerous. I spent weeks with phone calls and loads of paperwork, and spent the week before turning in my application practically living at Kinko's. There was a nuanced question of whether income-based repayment or income contingent repayment would qualify me for the program. And each time I called to ask about it, I would get a different answer. This had to be correct. And yet I ended up calling with a question, hanging up, and calling right back to get another agent and see if the answer was the same. If those two told me different things, I would call a third time as a tiebreaker. Sometimes I ended up calling a fourth or fifth time, usually on the occasional day I took off work because, quote unquote, I had loan stuff to do. I'll tell you, it's really not the most ideal way to spend a vacation day. So I finally got everything in properly to start the program, but every year I had to resubmit all of my tax and IRS information. When I asked if I had to provide proof of employment with a qualifying nonprofit each year as well, I was told not necessarily, but, quote unquote, it is easier for us to count. So, given my lack of confidence in the servicer, I took it upon myself to provide that as well every year. This is one of the reasons I kept my existing job for those years. I may have been able to increase my income by changing jobs, but I didn't want to risk some kind of requirement in the fine print that I didn't know about coming into play that would make me ineligible. I was too nervous to make a big change. About midway through, I became panicked when I asked my servicer how many payments had qualified so far. I have 2 loans on one account, so each monthly payment is applied to both. I had no way of putting my payment toward one or the other, but I was told that I had 70 qualified payments on one loan and 45 on the other. This is, of course, impossible, but it took me a year of appeals and an audit to find my missing payments. Now I'm on pins and needles, especially after hearing how few applicants are awarded the PSLF, even after years of carefully doing everything they thought they needed to do. It is heartbreaking, and for me the stakes are high. If I am not approved, that is $115,000 I am still on the hook for. I don't want to imagine an appeals process if I am denied, especially given the pandemic and my longer days at work while caring for our daughter. My student debt has impacted my life in many ways, including the stress and strain caused by seeking the PSLF I am entitled to. I had to put off buying a house because of my debt-to-income ratio, and that is with having no credit card debt. So this program, being so uncertain, has really limited my family's choices. I support the Student Borrower's Bill of Rights. We need, among other things, to require basic training and consistency of the agents answering the phones, because we get an astonishing range of answers, and it shouldn't be like Oz behind the curtains, with no one knowing who is pulling the strings. And having qualifying payments not counting toward the PSLF is unconscionable and hurts the many student borrowers in major life-impacting ways. Thank you for your attention to this, and please support the Student Borrower's Bill of Rights.
Thank you, Carol, for reading that borrower's statement, and thank you to the borrower for giving us permission to share their story at a particularly vulnerable time in the loan forgiveness process. Representatives, borrowers, supporters, thank you again for putting forth important legislation and supporting it. North Carolina, unfortunately, has a pretty big slice of the national student debt crisis. We can and we should address these problems through reforms that work so that the best interests of North Carolina students and borrowers are served. and all of our citizens and residents can participate in the economy of this state as we begin to recover and thrive. At the Center for Responsible Lending, we have seen student borrower bills of rights pass in over a dozen other states, providing immediate relief to students by holding servicers accountable for basic customer service that they should be offering anyway. We are glad to have the support of the North Carolina Coalition for Responsible Lending in this effort, including 40 organizations that have signed on to support student loan servicing reform. We all know student loan borrowers. They might be ourselves, our family members, our friends, our neighbors, but not all are willing to speak out about how much we struggle to repay debt. So it's hard for folks to know that it's not just their own personal problem. Today, we hope that we've begun to show that repaying student loan debt is a widespread problem, a systemic problem with policy solutions. Thank you to Trey and Kanisha and our other borrower for being willing to put themselves out there, which is so helpful when we seek to pass reform and so inspiring to others who we hope will become more willing to speak out about their experiences. Finally, thank you all who are watching on Facebook Live and who are present here today for joining us. We'd be happy to answer questions if there are any.